Grant Major, you're the production designer for The Power of the Dog, about a rancher who has a, shall we say, strained relationship with his new in-laws. The story is set in the American West, but was shot in New Zealand. What kind of feelings did you hope to evoke with this setting and the visual landscape of the film to kind of give that sense of place?
Ooh, well, yes, we did make it in New Zealand, but of course the audience need to feel that it's in Montana. So, you know, that was one of the obvious things about it. It's based on a book, of course. So the book itself evokes a certain world that we are wanting to bring to the fore as well. So, you know, there's all these sort of theoretical things, you could say, and then we kludge that together with the practical nature of actually, you know, how do we go about doing it? So, yeah, it's a sort of a two-way thing. You know, the book, we're very, very fortunate to have had the material behind the script. You know, the script itself is beautifully written by Jane, but of course it's an adaptation of Thomas Savage's book. That itself has so much more detail to it, you know, has so much more backstories to it. And, you know, so much of the work we do as production designers is to try and create worlds that feel real because they have their own history and their own sort of, things that sort of affect each individual scene that we're bringing to the screen. So, you know, everything sort of has to work in a sort of a multifaceted way like that. Does that make sense? Yeah, something like that.
And so much of the impact visually from the film comes from a lot of these outdoor locations and these sweeping vistas. What was the process of kind of planning those visuals and sort of using that landscape?
Yeah, well, look, you know, it's based on a cattle ranch. The story is based on a cattle ranch, and there's something very bold about that. The location itself has to speak, you know, it has to have a lot of shape, and it has to have a lot of kind of influence on the story, of course, you know. So Montana is a very big, broad sort of state, and it's has these large grasslands and mountains and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, New Zealand does have those sorts of things, and we're trying to find an equivalent for that. We were, of course, we have to be able to shoot it from a practical point of view of being able to accommodate a large amount of crew and find builders and painters and greens people from around the area. So, you know, all those sort of things affect what we're looking for. Jane herself doesn't like to make her mind up too quickly about landscapes, about specific locations, I should say. You know, she had a sort of a broad idea about how she wanted it to be, but, you know, then finding something that would suit that was a bit of a journey for us. So, you know, it was left till fairly late before the final decision was made. You actually have to sort of corner her and say, right, now's the time to make a decision on which one we're going to use. And we chose the right one, in my view. The location was also a working sheep and cattle ranch. So, you know, we had the advantage of having all that livestock that we were needing for the film on that particular location. And of course, it wasn't one location. You know, we had a few other areas and farms and properties that we used to sort of make it feel like it was the one property on the Burbank Ranch. So, yeah, did that answer your question? Yeah.
And that Burbank Ranch is such an important part of the film's emotional impact, that sense of that place and how the characters experience it. Like, what were those, like, what thoughts went into creating those interiors and you know, creating that sense of that time period?
Yeah, well, look, there's so much to be told in these sets. You know, it's we're very lucky to be able to make everything for the Burbank Ranch. You know, the project started with us seeing if there was an equivalent out there in New Zealand that we could use, that should go to and use, but of course there was nothing there that ticked all the boxes for what Thomas Savage and Jane wanted. So the house itself has, its own history is by the parents. So the parents have built this ranch in the 1880s, and they've both emigrated from the eastern states of America with all their highfalutin eastern states kind of aesthetic and lifestyle, so they actually supplanted this house onto the wilderness of Montana. We very much wanted to feel like that. We used a existing house called Sagamore House, which is Theodore Roosevelt's house, as a sort of a touchstone for the sort of house that it may have been. But of course, since the 1880s, and when our film takes place in the 1920s, quite a lot of history has happened. The house itself is weathered and sort of never really settled in to the landscape the way it might have been on the eastern states. So nothing really grows very easily around it. It's just grassland around it. So you get this quite fancy house sort of just placed on the landscape. The interior of the house in its original state would have once been the sort of social centre of the farms all around there. But since the parents have moved out, they've taken a certain amount of the furniture with them, and these sort of cavernous rooms have sort of got a slightly empty feel to it, which is synonymous with the sort of feeling of the world that Phil and George, our two brothers who occupy the house now, their lives, a little bit emotionally emptied out. It's also kind of dark and moody and masculine, so it's got this very sort of boys own sort of feel inside the house. And then we've got the Phil, who's the sort of the dominant personality in this family. We got his space in particular is the barn. So the barn has got this very strong sort of squarely built structure that's sort of placed bang in front of the mountainscape, where this shadow of the dog sort of piece of pareidolia emanates from. So it's got this very large strength to it. But then inside the barn is there's a lot of sort of subtleties in there. It's big boned. It's got these big logs that sort of make up the structure of the barn itself. But he makes these little craft objects. He can make this little fine pieces of furniture for his brother brother George. He does his own metalwork. He's a kind of craftsman, so he's actually got there's a hard side, but there's a sort of a sensitive side to him as well. And right in the middle of that, again, is the shrine to Bronco Henry, this sort of never really seen but referred to a lot, this person who's affected Phil's life a lot, So and in the heart of the barn is this shrine, and so all these stories, that get told in so many different layers, and one of the layers is the production design of it, where we're sort of able to quote all these things. Anyway, that's a couple of the main things, and of course, sort of goes on from there to all the minor sets.
And with all those like little details that give us so much information, like the Bronco Henry shrine, and what's it like finding props and set dressings, and to really create that sense of authenticity and specificity.
Great. Yeah, well, look, the 1920s, it's almost 100 years ago now, and when I was younger, that sort of stuff was more readily available. Now it's getting to be more collector-y stuff. So in New Zealand, it's quite different from working in the States and maybe in Europe. We don't really have the big prop houses that we can go to and go shopping. So the props buyers and set decoration buyers tend to raid people's collections. There's various personal collections in museums and antique shops and things like that we can go to find what we're looking for. We did end up making quite a quantity of things. A lot of the wall surfaces, like wallpapers and linos and pieces of furniture, specific pieces of furniture and things like that, we did end up having to make. We did send in fact, the set decorator herself went to LA to get a 40-foot container full of full of the things that we couldn't find locally at all. But so it's a matter of sort of building up through a lot of different ways to be able to get it. We are, there was a lot of specific things that are mentioned in the script, in fact, that we had to go out of our way to find. A lot of taxidermy, for example, in the house, which gives a certain flavour and sort of masculine sort of background of, to me, a background of sort of violence but also craft and sort of making of these heads that sort of dominate the interior. So we're able to find a certain amount of that in New Zealand, including the great big moose head that was over the top of the fireplace. That was a good find. But we ended up having to import some of that as well. So, we're quite resourceful in New Zealand. We are connected with the rest of the world, and we do go out and, acquire things from overseas. But I'm pleased to say that we did find and make most of it in New Zealand here.
Well, congratulations on your work on the film. Thank you so much for talking to me about it. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Cool.
Great. And we will have you back soon.